All right, students, this one is on sound and sense in poetry. When we talk about sound, I'm probably going to use the phrase sonic elements a lot. Sonic element is just something that makes use of sound. Sonic. They're a very important part of poetry and include things like rhyme, meter, and rhythm, which is different from meter. The difference doesn't really matter too much. Enjambment, which again is continuing a sentence from line to line or from stanza to stanza. Punctuation is part of sound because pauses are part of sound. Alliteration, assonance, consonance, automatopoeia, and many others. They all add up to how a poem sounds when it is read aloud. When you make use of any of these sonic elements, you should make sure that they add to or emphasize the meaning of the poem. Why is this moving backward? All right, here we go. For example, in Sunday Afternoons by Yusuf Komunyakaa, there are a lot of short, concrete sentences early on, which is the way you might imagine a child thinking. The sentences get more complicated as the poem goes on, which makes sense because this is a poem about growing up, about realizing the way the world is. Also, later in the poem, we see cross-stanza enjambment, where the sentence continues between stanzas, and that makes the pace of the poem increase as the emotions of the poem intensify. And the abstract language that takes place later in the poem is beyond how a child would think. I knew that where I stood in the darkness looking out into the light, I could see everything through nothing. This is not something we would expect a child to say, or the way that we would expect a child to formulate their thoughts. So we can see that the speaker of this poem is advancing in their reasoning as the poem goes on. In One Art by Elizabeth Bishop, we have a particular form. The rhyming scheme of this poem follows what's called a villanelle, which is a form of a poem. It's just like a sonnet is a form of a poem, the villanelle is a form. And the repeated lines, while they are part of the villanelle, Bishop chose this form because the repetition of the art of losing isn't hard to master and seems like a disaster. Words like that, those repeated lines mirror the speaker's repeated acts of losing. And the rhyme, which is also villanelle, not just the specific repeated lines, but the rhyme scheme itself, links master with disaster, which shows what our speaker is really mastering is a disaster. Losing all of these things has been a disaster for them. And that linking of master with disaster is something that you should think about when you're, if you're going to use rhyme, you need to think about the pairs of words that you're using. If you take a look at the exercise that you have for this week, you have a rhyming exercise where I'm asking you to link words together in a straightforward way. So, for example, slow dance and romance. Or, well, I'm asking you to do both of these. 5 pairs of straightforward connections and also 5 pairs of questionable links where your reader might see that link and then wonder what exactly the speaker means by this. Like rhyming the ballet move, I don't know how to call this, the ballet move arabesque with the word grotesque, which is not a rhyme that it doesn't fit together as nicely as slow dance and romance. And your reader might see that and think, okay, what does the speaker really mean? This is supposed to be a graceful thing. Why are they rhyming it with grotesque? So these links are important in building the meaning of the poem. Winter Sundays by Haydn uses consonants. I mentioned this in the last video, but consonants is repeated consonant sounds. If we look back Alliteration is repeated consonant sounds at the beginnings of words. Consonance is repeated consonant sounds no matter where they are, in the middle of words, the beginnings of words, whatever. Assonance is repeated vowel sounds. Onomatopoeia is using words like pop or slap, where the word itself sounds like the action it describes or the thing it describes. So the consonants in Winter Sundays uses repeated K and hard C sounds, cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. That repeated K sound breaks up the words in that beginning stanza, beginning two stanzas, really. We see it. Although as the house warms up after the father makes the fire, those hard k sounds fade away. We don't see them as often. So it makes the poem sound harsh in the beginning, and then as it warms up, that repeated sound fades away as the house becomes more comfortable physically. The repetition of the phrase, "What did I know?" in the last couplet emphasizes the emotion of those words. They don't give an image for us to see, but that repeated, "What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices?" that sounds to me like a lament, like our speaker is regretting the things that they didn't know when they were a child. Why Brownlee Left by Muldoon. I know that I said I was going to leave this as a mystery for you, but here are some of the answers at any rate. The first line is iambic tetrameter instead of iambic pentameter. So by dropping that iamb, by removing one of the feet, you make it sound to someone who expects iambic pentameter that missing iamb is apparent. So if you look at it and you think, oh, it's a sonnet, and you read it and you hear the missing iamb, well, first, that's someone who knows what iambic pentameter sounds like, so maybe they're looking for this stuff to begin with, but it shows us that something is missing. And the use of slant rhyme through most of the poem, foot to and future is one of the ones that we talked about, barley and early, with and wife, that emphasizes that something is wrong. Perfect rhyme means that things are matching together well. The ear hears those and expects to hear them and is made happy by them. Whereas these slant rhymes, these off rhymes, they don't sound quite right. I'm sure that some of you heard my arguments about the rhyming in Why Brownlee Left and disagreed with me completely that it was rhyme at all. And this is why. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like it's a rhyme at all. So that's something that you can use. All right, let's take a look at Richard Kenny's Aubade. If you remember when we were looking at Philip Larkin's Aubade, I said that an Aubade was a poem for the two lovers who are parting at dawn, knowing that they would meet again later that day. So here's Richard Kenny's Aubade. Cold snap, 5 o'clock. Outside, a heavy frost, dark footprints in the brittle grass, a cat's. Quick coffee, jacket, watch cap, keys. Stars blaze across the black gap between the horizons. Pickup somehow strikes its own dim spark. An arc starts. Inside, familiar metal cab, an icebox full of lightless air, limbs green with dashlight. Vinyl seat cracks, cold and brittle, horn ring gleams, and chrome cuts hard across the wrist where the sleeve falls off the glove as Moontrack curves its cool tiara somewhere underneath your sleep this very moment, love. So we can ask our 3 questions about this. Our speaker appears to be someone who is getting up very early in a cold snap They're walking outside after getting quick coffee. They get their jacket, their cap, grab their keys. They look at the stars blazing across the black gap between the horizons, the stars in the sky. They're starting their pickup. They're sitting in the cab of the pickup, which is an icebox full of lightless air. And the car, which has started, the pickup, which has started, the dash lights outline everything in the cab with green. The vinyl seat cracks beneath the speaker. It's cold and brittle. The horn ring gleams in front of them, and the chrome of the steering wheel hits their wrist where the sleeve and the glove that they're wearing has parted. As Moontrack curves its cool tiara somewhere underneath your sleep this very moment, love. Okay. So we go back to the sonic elements of this poem. These are some of the things that I notice. We have really short phrases at the beginning of the poem, choppy speech, not even full sentences. We have flashes of images, much like we see in Elizabeth Bishop's The Moose. Just flashes of things, which makes me think that our speaker isn't really completely awake as they're leaving the house at 5 a.m, presumably to go to work. Again, we have that same consonants, the K, hard, C, which it seems to me that poets use that a lot to indicate discomfort or harsh sounds. And here we have kind of the same thing. It's cold out. It's a heavy frost. I grew up in Minnesota, and I remember getting up in the early morning in the very cold and feeling like this. Everything was kind of harsh. So this seems familiar to me. And then we have this long sentence where the sleeve falls off the glove as Moontrack curves its cool tiara. So the chrome across the wrist, the curve of that reminds our speaker that the person that they've just left, their love, is still sleeping. And this last long sentence shifts from that harsh, hard C, K noise to smoother sounds to end the poem. So these are all things that you can use in your own writing, and read back over what we've talked about and see if you can come up with other sonic elements that are used. The other reading that I want to talk about is 13 Ways of Thinking About the Poetic Line by Dana Gioia. Let's see here. This is not the entire thing. You'll notice I've only included 4 things from a thing that's called 13 Ways of Doing Something. But these are the boiled down versions of the entire thing. Basically, what Gioia is saying in this essay is that every choice you make in writing should add to the meaning. You aren't rhyming things just because they rhyme, and you aren't using perfect rhyme or slant rhyme just because you thought of a word that fits. You're using those things because they matter, because they add to the meaning of the poem. Another thing that Gioia points out in this essay is that it's important to think about patterns and the way that your reader is going to approach the poem. So that's why in a sonnet, if you have a line that is I am, that's iambic tetrameter, and it's missing the end of it, a reader who is listening for that last thing, who knows the pattern of a sonnet, is going to notice the missing part. So another example would be if you write perfect iambic pentameter, if you keep a perfect rhythm and or rhyme scheme or whatever for half of your poem, when it disappears, your reader is going to notice. And that's something you can do to manipulate the reader's experience, to make them notice a particular point in the poem. You build up an expectation in the reader, and then you change it to affect them with purpose. So I guess overall, the lesson to learn from this is that the sense of the poem, the meaning of the poem, is what matters the most. The sound should always be in service of that meaning.